Welcome to phase 3 of this Android app development course. In this phase, we're going to be dealing with how to save data. We're going to be using a button to create a sum and then saving that sum to memory. At the same time, we're going to have a text box where we're going to enter text into. Then when we click this button, it's going to save that text to memory. So by the end of this phase, we are going to have learned how to save a number, how to add a number, how to subtract the number, and of course how to save text to memory. Then eventually when this app launches again, it's going to load up those information from memory and display them on this text view and in the text box. So let's dive into that. Before we dive in, let me show you how this is done generically in Android. That is how to save simple data in Android. So in Android, saving data is done using a class called, let me zoom in, it's done using a class called Shared Preferences. So Shared Preferences offers you the API to save things like text, numbers, sets, booleans, and save them into memory, and they're gonna remain in memory until you remove them or until the app is removed from the device. So we're going to be using shared preferences today, but we're going to be using them from inside a class called TinyDB. TinyDB is a library that I created to help make using shared preferences easier. It's even built on top of shared preferences by letting you save lists, numbers, images, and even objects. So let's go ahead and start off by creating a utilities folder. It's in this folder that we're going to have our TinyDB file placed in, and in the future we're also going to put other utilities in this folder. So let's go inside our project. So on the left hand side here, of course, this is Android Studio. If you don't have it open it up. On the left hand side, I'm gonna right click on our Java folder, and then I'll click new package, select main/Java, and then click OK. So we're going to call this folder utils. So that's UTILS. Then press enter. Okay, so now we are going to go ahead and download TinyDB. So click on the GitHub link. So like I said, TinyDB lets you save data using shared preferences in a very easy way. To download it, simply go ahead and click code, download as zip. So when you download it as zip, unzip it, and then that should open up these two files after you've unzipped them. Now, when you have them unzipped, go back to Android Studio and minimize the window a little bit. Then click on your file browser. Then click and drag TinyDB into the utils folder. Okay. So now that it's in, let me make sure the package is correct. Utils imports are correct. All right, now that it's in, it's ready to use. Everything is looking good. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to go to the page of TinyDB. And then we're going to follow this instruction here to import JSON, but this will be afterwards. We're not gonna need this now. This is something we're going to do towards the end. Right now we have TinyDB imported. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and actually start using it. So let's dive in. So in the last session, we created a new button that launches a new screen. In this session, we're going to be adding another button that is going to, in this case, launch a new screen that will help us save data and design this screen that I showed you here. So we're going to create a new screen for this, create a new button that is going to launch this screen. And we're going to do this from our main activity. If you remember last time we had two activities, the main one, which is the first one, and then the second one. So from the main one, which is the one we are currently on, we're going to add a new button, and we're going to call that button screen 3. So I'm gonna click a button, add it. Okay, then we're gonna change the name for the button. Let's call it screen 3. Okay, and then I'm going to resize it to match the one we previously had. Okay, then the next thing I'm going to do is to add constraints. Remember, constraints are required for when you are building on top of a constraint layout. And the constraints we are going to need here is really just 2. So click on the 2 sides of this. I'm going to start with the one on the right. Click it and drag it towards the end. Then click this one as well and drag it towards the bottom. So now you can actually drag this to wherever you want safely. Okay, so now that's done. The constraint has been added, no errors. Let's change this to our app name real quick. So this text view, let's call it, where is the title? Text. Yeah, so let's change it to seed. Our app name is seed. Let's change it to seed. So now we have it titled seed. One last thing I would like us to do is let's change the background color of our screen. So constraint layout, I'm gonna X this out, find background. If you can't find any of these attributes, you can just search for it up here. But this is our background. We're gonna change it to something cooler. Maybe let's try this green. How about this one? Let's see. Okay. Yeah, I think this is good. Taking too much time here. Let's leave it at green. All right, let's leave it at green. I think this green is good. All right, maybe we'll make more changes in the future. And feel free to customize it to whatever you want. So we have screen 2, screen 3. So one more thing I would like us to do, remember in screen 2 was all about launching a new screen by clicking a button. So let's call this screen 2 button click. Button click. Then screen 3 is going to be saving data. So let's call that saving data. Saving data. Okay. All right. So the next one we're going to the next thing we're going to do is to actually create a screen that this is going to be launching, and then connect this button to that screen. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to right click on our main app folder, which is this one, com.example.seed. I'm going to right click on it and then click new. I'm going to go to activity. Remember, an activity is a screen. and then I'm going to go to empty activity. That means I want a blank activity. So I'm gonna click that. I want this to be called screen 3. Screen 3. No space. Screen 3. And then click finish. Okay, so now we have, this error is gonna go out in a second. Now we have screen 3 set up. Now we can actually reference this screen 3 from screen 2, from screen 1, where we're gonna launch it from. So let's go to our screen 1, which is main activity. It's right here. So remember the button we added? Where is it? Activity main. So this button we added, the ID, I'm gonna rename it to button 3. Let's call it button 3. So now we're changing the ID. Click refactor, yes. By the way, I pressed enter, then I clicked refactor. So we've changed the ID to button 3. So now we can go to our main activity, which is the Java file, and then use this ID to initialize this button. So on our main activity, I'm going to add a new button here. I'm gonna say comma screen 3 button. Now this is one way of doing this. Another way of doing this is to actually completely define a new button by saying button screen 3 button, and then I'll come here and initialize it in our onCreate method by saying screen 3 equal to find view by ID r.id dot button 3. So with this, the button is no longer null, it's now initialized. So now we can call an onClick listener on this button. So remember, we have a function here called set click listeners. We're going to go inside this function, which is here, and then set a click listener for this button so that we can detect when this button is clicked. So screen 3 dot set on click listener. I'm going to say new on click listener. As this suggestion comes up, just press enter. So now it's inside here that we're going to now launch the new screen 3 that we created. So to do that, I'm just going to copy the same code we had before. Control C, depending on the computer you're on. Okay, I'm going to change this to screen 3. If you're on Kotlin, just do the same thing. Just make a little change by changing this number. So now this would launch our new screen. Okay, so let's go to our screen 3 and make a little change so that we can actually know it's screen 3. So maybe we'll change the color. Colors again. Where is our background? So always have to find background. Okay, we're gonna give this something on this edge. Okay, so let's do a quick test by running the app and see if we see a blue background like this. That means everything is good. So let me press. First, we're gonna go over our code to make sure our code is correct. So main activity, we initialize the button. We declared a button variable. We initialized it, and then we set an onClick listener on it, and then in that on-click listener we launched a new screen, which is screen 3. Okay, that looks like it should work, so let's go ahead and try that out. I'm gonna press play. Launch succeeded. Let's see. Okay, looks like we have some issues with our constraints. Let's go ahead and fix that. So that will be activity main. I'll bring this down. So I'm gonna add another one here. Let me do it from here. Maybe that'll be easier. Great. Okay. Gonna move this up. Move this one up a little bit more. Okay, then I'm going to pixel 3. Let's see. I think that should match our emulator. Yeah. Okay, so let's run again and see how that looks. Okay, now we're missing our seed. Come on. Alright, let's try one more time. Yeah, issues with constraint layout. Okay, so this should come up a little bit more. Yeah. By the way, in the future we are going to be using a different layout system that is going to scale much better. So this is all temporary for now. All right, so let's move forward. So now we have our button. So now we're going to start designing the screen we have over here, which is our saving data screen. So let's go to screen 3. Screen 3.xml. This is this one, which is this one. By the way, we forgot to test. Screen 3, saving data, awesome, it launched. Okay. So I'm going to make this bigger so we can have more space to develop on. Alright, so the first thing we have at the top is a sum text field, which is this one up here under common. So I'm going to drag that in, make it a little bigger. Then I'm going to change this to a number by let me search for text. So let me change this to 0 for now, and then I'm going to center this. But first let me change the text color. So I want this to be bold, I want the color to be black, and I'm going to center it, and then I'm going to change the text appearance to be large. And then I'm going to change the gravity to be center. Center true. Awesome. Okay, so now we've done that. The next thing I'm going to do is going to assign constraints. Okay, let me use this one. Sometimes the right side is always troublesome. Okay, so now that's done. So the next thing we have on our design is two buttons, one for addition and one for subtraction. I think I need to change the color to improve the contrast. So let me change the color, the background color of this. Then I'll put it back to white. Let's see. Okay. So we're going to add a vertical constraint, and then we're going to drag it down to where we want it. So that's done. We're going to need a button for addition. I'm going to drag that in. Another button. And then we're going to add constraints for our buttons. I'll do the same for this one. Okay, then for our text view, let's change the background to match the design. So the design is greenish. Let's change it to a greenish color. Okay, well, that's good. So let's do a quick check and see how it looks. Okay, it's looking good. So now let's rename the button. So for this button, we want it to be a simple subtract. No, this should be the plus. The plus, enter, and then we're going to increase the text size. Text appearance, we want it to be large. For this button, we want it to be subtract. Then text appearance, we want it to be large as well. Okay, so the next thing on our design is a text box and then a save button. So let's do that. We're going to need a search for a git text. That should be on the text. Let me do this the hard way. Okay, let me see. It's Yeah, it's still called edit text. Why isn't it showing up? Let's see. Okay, so it's the first one. So when you search edit text, just drag in the first one. Okay, which is the one that says plain text. Drag that in. So I have mine dragged in already. So let's increase the size of this a little bit. And then the next thing on our design is a button. So let's add constraints to this and then bring in the button. So we're gonna add a vertical constraint, a horizontal constraint, and then drag it to where we want it. Then let's bring in a button to save the text. Let's add a horizontal constraint, a vertical constraint, and then let's change the text to save. I believe that's what we titled it. Yeah, save idea. So let's change it to save idea. Then this one, we're going to change the hint to idea. So we're going to remove the text and then find hint. This is what we want, idea. I'm sure you already know what a hint is. A hint is the hint that tells you what the text box contains or should contain. All right, so we have this designed. Our sum, our add button, our subtract button, our idea text box, and then our save button. So let's go ahead and assign corresponding IDs to all of this and then connect them to the screen. Okay, so let's see. So the first one, let's call this, I'm gonna get rid of this. Let's call this let's call it sum text view. Sum SUM underscore text view. Enter. Click refractor. And then this one, let's call it add button. So I'm gonna say add underscore button. Enter. Remember, these IDs are what we're gonna use to connect these buttons to the screen. For this one, we're gonna call it subtract button. That's 3 T's. I need just 2. Okay, and then I'm going to press enter, refractor, and then this one I'm gonna call it idea edits text. Enter, refractor, and then this one will be save idea button. Enter. Okay, so we have idea assigned to this, assigned to this, assigned to this, assigned to this, and assigned to this. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna connect this to the screen. But before we do that, let's go ahead and do a quick check of our interface and make sure it's looking correct. Okay, we have an error somewhere. It says restart. Go ahead. It wants to restart the app on the emulator. Okay, screen 3. Alright, so I need to shift this. Alright, so we're gonna do some shifting to make these things align. Don't worry, by the next session we're going to start using a different layout system, but for this start we're gonna just deal with constraints layout. All right. So let's bring this one down. Yeah, let's bring them all the way down. Let's see. Okay, let's do a quick check again. All right. I'm gonna shift this to the left a little bit. Do a quick check again. Let's see. Okay, looks okay now. So we have everything. Now let's go ahead and make these buttons actually work. All right, so on our this is screen 3. So we're gonna go to screen3.java, and then we're going to import all those variables. So we had a button, and that button was add button, add, press alternate enter to import this, add button, semicolon, then on that button, which was subtract button, then we had another button which was save, no, button, save idea button. Okay, so next we had a screen 3, we had a text view. So let's bring that in. Text view. Remember, text view displays text. Let's call that some TV. Oh, let's be very plain. Some text view. Okay. And then lastly, we had a text box which is called edit text. I'm gonna call that idea text box. Okay. All right, so next we're gonna do is we're gonna connect all these to their corresponding widget on the layout by using the IDs. So as you already know, the first thing we're gonna do is write down the name of the variable, some text view equal to find view by ID, r.id. We use the same we use the same ID we used on the screen. So here we had some text view as the ID. So we're going to use that same ID again. That's some text view. And then for the add button, I'm going to say add button equal to find view by ID, r.id.add button. That's the same ID we used. And then the subtract button equal to find view by ID, r.id.subtract button. That was the ID we used in the XML. Then our text box, which was this one, which was this text box here, we used an ID of idea edit text. We're gonna use that. So idea text box equal to find view by ID, r.id.idea edit text. Then lastly, we had our save idea button, which is this one here. So we're gonna say save idea button equal to find view by ID r.id dot save idea button. Okay, so now we have everything initialized. The sum text view correctly initialized, add button correctly initialized, subtract button correctly initialized, idea text box correctly, save idea button correctly initialized. So it's always good to check these, and then we're gonna proceed by making these buttons work when they are clicked. And to do this, we're going to create a function, a method called setClick public void set click listeners. Okay, so in this function we're going to be calling the on-click listeners of all these. So to start with, we're going to start with our add button. We're going to say add button dot set on click listener, new on click listener. Okay, we're going to eventually repeat all these for all these other views, but before we dive into repeating this set on click listener for all these other views, let us call this set click listener at the end of our onCreate method. That way they would actually get fired. So let's say set click listeners. All right, good. So add button dot set on click listener. So let's do the same thing for our subtract button. So let's copy the same code. Let's copy it and then paste it here, and then just change this to subtract button. Okay. We also have another button here called save idea button. So let's paste the same code and then change this variable to save idea button. Okay, so that means on screen 3 our we've set a click listener for this, set a click listener for this, and then we've set a click listener for this one. So remember, our goal is to, when this button is clicked, it's going to add a number to our text. This one clicked is going to add a number to our text view. When this one is clicked, it's going to save the text on this text box. It's really that simple. Then when the app is launched again, everything loads back from memory. Okay. So let's start with making this button add a number to whatever is here. Okay, so that means we need to have a variable that would hold the sum. Okay, so let's try this. We need a global variable of an integer int. I'm gonna call this sum. Then inside here we're going to initialize our sum equal to 0. All right, so when add button is clicked, we want to increment this sum by saying sum plus sum is equal to sum plus 1. So this is how we increment our sum. Then we now update the sum text view with the new sum. Okay, so we say sum text view dot set text and then we say sum plus quotes. The reason I added quotes is to convert this into a string. Okay, because the setText function accepts a string, so we are converting sum, which is an integer, into a string. An integer is a number, a string is a text in Java. So we're converting this into a text by adding quotes to it. So let's do a very quick test and see how this app works. Okay, by the way, I need to move this thing down. Let me do that quickly. Activity main. This needs to come down. Okay, so I added constraints to all 4 sides to help keep things in place. I'm gonna do the same thing for this one as well. I'm gonna do the same thing for this one as well. I'll put it here. Okay, so now that should help keep things in place. Let me run another test. Okay, looking good. So simply just add constraints to all 4 sides and everything should be good. So I'm gonna bring this up a little bit. Okay, so screen 3, click that, it launches our calculator screen. I click plus, as you can see it's working. It's incrementing our number. Minus currently is dumb, it doesn't do anything. Okay, so let's go back to our code and continue working on it. So remember that the goal is to make this add and make this subtract. So let's go ahead and make this subtract numbers from our sum. So I'm gonna go back to screen 3. And we're going to copy this same code and paste it in our subtract function here. So, but in this case, as you might have guessed, this will be sum minus 1. So our sum, which is a global variable, whatever it is currently, we subtract 1 from it and then assign the new value to our sum variable. So then we now pass this current sum into the text field. All right, so let's test this out and see. All right, plus plus subtract subtract, awesome, subtract subtract, plus 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 plus. It's working perfectly. Now let me use this opportunity to show you alternative ways of doing the same thing. So as you can see, to increment this sum, we said sum equal to sum plus 1. Here is another way of doing this by saying sum plus equal to 1. This is another way of doing it. You can also do the same thing by saying sum plus plus semicolon. So sum plus equal to 1 increments sum by 1. Sum plus plus increments sum by 1. You can say sum plus equal to 10. Sum adds 10 to whatever the variable is currently at. But sum plus plus will only ever just add 1 to the value. So this only adds 1, but this one can add anything you want. But when it says plus plus, simply means increment by 1. You can't change this to not be increment by 1. It only works for ones. Anyways, these are 3 ways of doing the same thing. This is actually the fastest because it does the increment by 1. Okay, so but I'm going to get rid of this and we're going to focus on this one. Okay. All right. Oh, by the way, the same thing works for subtract. You can say sum minus equal to 1, and it subtracts 1. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and so now we have this done. The next thing we are going to do, we have this working, this working. The next thing we are going to do is design this in such a way that when the app is closed, and launched again, this comes back from memory. I remember I told you we're gonna be using TinyDB for this purpose. Where is that? TinyDB. That's this. Where is it? It's under utils folder. That's this file we have here. We're gonna be using it to save this to memory. So let's declare a variable for TinyDB. So let's say TinyDB, semicolon. And also, real quick, let's declare a actually we don't need this right now. So let's go ahead and initialize TinyDB. So let's say over here below set content view, let's say TinyDB, which is this name we gave it here, equal to new TinyDB, and then we pass in context for our application. And to do this, simply say get application context. Okay, so now we've initialized TinyDB and it's ready to use. All right, so whenever we increment the sum, we want to save the new sum to memory. So let's do that by saying TinyDB dot put int. Remember I told you int is a number, and then the parameters for put int is a string which acts as a key, and then the value, which will be the sum. Saving stuff in programming, a lot of times they require they are in the form of key value pairs. That means you have kind of like a box in memory where you can save something in, and if you want to retrieve that, then you need the key that you use to save that in that box. And that key in most cases is simply a text. So that means we can use something like the text last sum, and then as a key, and then the value will be sum. The only key thing you need to remember is to remember the key that you used, because we're gonna use the key to retrieve this from memory the next time that we run the app. All right, so now we add text, we save it to memory. So let's do the same thing for our subtract button, so that when we subtract, we also save it to memory. So right now it doesn't save. We want it to save when it's saved to memory. See, it doesn't save. So we want it to actually save when it goes to memory. So let's do that. So let's copy this and paste it in our subtract button. So TinyDB.putInt last sum equal to sum is the same thing. All right, so now let's run the app again and check. By the way, this error is simply saying that we need to reinstall the app again. That's fine. It's not really an error, but all right. So screen 3 plus saves to memory minus saves to memory plus saves to memory minus saves to memory. But did you notice that when we opened this screen, it didn't load the last sum from memory? That's because we didn't implement that yet. We only made it to save this into memory, but we didn't write the code that retrieves this from memory. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and write the code that will retrieve the sum of the last calculation from memory when the screen launches. Oops, I opened the wrong emulator. All right, so to load the sum from memory, we simply need to remember this key. So I'm going to copy this key, copy, and then instead of initializing the sum to 0 in the onCreate method, remember I told you this onCreate method is called automatically when the screen launches. So here I'm going to say TinyDB .getInt. Remember that here we said put int to save. So to retrieve, we're going to say getInt, and then we simply pass in the key that we used to save it, which is the same key we have here. All right, so I'm going to paste it in because I already have it in memory. I don't recommend you type it out. I recommend you copy and then come here and paste it to avoid errors. All right, so let's run the test again and see if it's going to load from memory. Okay, so screen 3 plus, and then I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna launch it again. It's not loading from memory. What do we have going wrong? Okay, let's check. So we are saving the ints, last sum, getting the ints. Okay, so the problem is we didn't put this on the text view. We loaded it into memory, but we didn't load it on the text view. So let's go ahead and do that. Our sum text view dot set text, and then we simply pass in the sum plus quotes. Okay, remember the quotes makes it a string. All right, so let's run the app again and check. All right, I'll press back. See, it now loads the sum from memory and displays it. I'm gonna add 5, make it 10, go back, launch it again, 10. See that? Okay, so now we've been able to make this save to memory every time the buttons are clicked. And then when the app launches again, we're going to load that from memory. So the next thing is to actually implement the same thing for our text box here. So this section is like where we save app ideas. You know, we have this cool app idea. We come inside this our special app, type in the text box, and it saves it. And then we click the save idea button and it saves the idea. So let's go ahead and implement that. It follows the same pattern as what we did for the numbers, except that in this case, instead of getInt, we're going to say getText, and instead of instead of putInt, we're going to say putString. So inside our save idea button, let's go there and initialize our idea. So string would be equal to, let's call it idea, equal to idea text box dot get text dot toString. Okay, so what we just did now is we loaded the text that was on our text box. We loaded it into a string variable. so that we can actually manipulate and use it. That's why we said idea text get text toString. ToString converts a editable that is gotten from this call into a string. Remember, a string is a text. Okay, so now we have the idea. We can now save it into memory by saying tinydb dot put string. This is the one we need, put string. And as you can see, it takes in a parameter of a key, which is the key we're gonna need to access it from memory in the future, and the actual string value, which is the idea. Okay, so we're going to pass that in. The key, let's call the key last idea. Okay, and then the actual value would be idea. All right, so now we have saved this idea into memory by using TinyDB. So let's also load this from memory whenever the screen launches. All right, so we're going to say idea text box dot. Or let's make this much simpler. Let's initialize a string first. So string, let's call it idea. Let's call it idea. This will be equal to tinydb dot get string, and then we're gonna pass in that key we used here, the same key we used. Gonna copy it and then paste it in here, so that it loads our last idea into this variable called idea. Then now we have the idea variable. We can now display it on our idea text box. So let's say string, let's say idea text box dot set text, and we're gonna pass in our idea. It's really that simple. So here we loaded the sum from memory, displayed it. Here we loaded our idea from memory and displayed it. Notice that we didn't define this idea as a global variable. This is because we really didn't need to, because we are not modifying our idea like we are modifying the sum. So it wasn't really necessary to have it as a global variable. So we've implemented the code that would load it from memory, and we have the code that saves it into memory. So let's go ahead and test this out. All right, so we have our screen 3. Of course, this one is working. Let me put an idea. Let's say idea about a seed app. Yeah, a seed app. Ironically, the same name as our app name. Okay, and then I'm gonna click save idea. The idea should be saved. I'm gonna press back, launch the screen again. Our seed app idea is there. Awesome. Now we've been able to save numbers into memory, load numbers from memory, save text into memory, and load text from memory. Now, one more thing I would like us to do is to show you a way to give feedback, like a visual feedback of what's going on in the app. And we're going to do that using something called Toast in Android. So we have in our Android Studio, we have our utilities folder. In there, let's go ahead and create a file called a Java class called tools. Okay, press enter. Now I want you to go to the docs and copy the snippet I have there. So under utilities, click on this and then copy this snippet, copy it, press copy, and then go into your projects and paste it inside this file we just created. Okay, so what I just did is I created a utilities file folder, and then inside that folder I put in a class called tools. This tools is going to be an extension of whatever activity we are working on. We're going to be putting in helper methods and codes in here, methods that will help us make things easier. Right now we added a method called toast, which will toast a message to the screen when we need to do that. For example, let me show you an example of this. In our screen 3, where is it? Over there. So remember when we saved the idea and then we click this, there is really nothing that tells us it's saved, but we need some kind of visual feedback. So to do that, we're going to come down here and say something like tools dot toast, and then we pass in our message. In this case, our message should be idea saved, and then the next parameter is a context. This is where we say get application context again. Okay, this is just an inferred context from the activity. Context means the attributes of the activity. Anyways, so let's test this out and see how it works. Alright, so I'm gonna click save idea. You see that idea saved shows up. This tells you that the idea actually saved, so it's not like the app is not responding. If for any reason this toast doesn't show, here is a way to fix it real quick. Go on the AVD manager, which is this button up here with the Android head. Click it, and then on your emulator, click the drop down, and then click wipe data, and then do a code boot. That should fix it, and then the toast should show up. So that's the toast. And then another thing I would like to show you on this class before we move forward is this is very long, and we can actually make this simpler. This get application context, we can define a variable for it. So let's say something like context. Okay, we're gonna define a context, and we're gonna say context semicolon, and then we come in here and define it. Context equal to get application context. So that way we don't have to keep calling get application context each time. We can simply just pass in the context. Okay, and then we come down here and simply again pass in the context. All right, and it looks, our code looks much simpler just by doing that. So today we've gone through how to save data, how to retrieve data by creating this app. We've gone through the Android ways of doing this using TinyDB. We've saved the text and saved the sum. We've added a toast to our utilities file. Next, I want to show you how to import libraries from GitHub. Now, GitHub is a website. It's a code sharing website, kind of like the social media of coding. GitHub is a place where you, as a programmer, you have a cool idea, you create it, and then you post it on GitHub for people to use. You use libraries from people, people use libraries from you. It's a social sharing of code. That's how you got this TinyDB. Because I felt like this would be helpful, I created it and I shared it with the world. So So that's GitHub. You're going to be using this a lot, and I highly recommend you, before you dive into something deep, like a very difficult concept in programming, I highly recommend you look up libraries on that project or on that idea and see if it's already on GitHub. If it is, I highly recommend you use it. Save yourself 3 weeks of coding. So, most of the time when you find a GitHub project like this, you are going to need to import it, and most of the time it's not going to be the way we did with TinyDB. It's usually going to be using Gradle lines like implementation. I'm sure I've not showed you what Gradle is. So Gradle is a part of your project that deals with dependencies. You're going to see two files on the left column. You're going to see on the left row, you're going to see two files, one called build.gradle and the one called build.gradle. The difference is one is for the module and the other one is for the project. The project is the root project containing your app, and then the module is the one you most of the time will need to make changes to. So you click on the module, and then it's in there under the dependencies. That's where you make changes to. That's where you import libraries from, especially the ones you find on GitHub. So for TinyDB, I don't know why this thing keeps shifting. All right, for TinyDB doesn't have any dependencies, but sometimes libraries will. Actually, TinyDB does have an optional dependency if you want to save objects, which we will dive into in the future. So for that object saving, we are going to need to import a library called Json. Okay, and to do that, all we need to do is copy the line that says implementation. This could sometimes say compile. It's the same thing. So just copy this line, press copy, and then go into your project and then put it inside the same dependencies bracket. So I'm gonna put it here, enter, paste it there, and then once you do that, you click sync. Okay, click sync. Now, by the way, this is not required for TinyDB. This is only if you need to use the objects aspect of the object aspect of TinyDB, which uses JSON. And we are going to use that. That's why I'm making you import this. So it has successfully downloaded JSON. It's now in the project. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to enable TinyDB to use it, and that's by doing some very quick modifications in our import. We're going to uncomment this, and then we're going to scroll down and find other commented JSON code and uncomment that as well. This is one. Uncomment this. Oh, by the way, to uncomment, simply highlight and press Ctrl/ or Command/ depending on your computer. Keep going down. Uncomment this as well. I think that's the last bit of it. Yeah. So now TinyDB is compatible with saving objects. All right. So this is how to import libraries from GitHub. Let me give you one last example of importing libraries. For example, in the future, we're going to be importing a library called Picasso, which makes displaying images much easier. So you can always do something like you can search it on Google and be like Android Picasso. Okay, and then you see the links. You probably want to click the GitHub link, and then you would see the instructions. You see the same implementation again. Okay, and sometimes you may need to look at the documentation of that project to see how to use it. We're gonna dive into this later, but not now. But I just want to show you how useful GitHub is. It's really popular for sharing code, and it's gonna be your best friend along the line. If you love a code, it's good to star it up here. that saves it into your starred repositories under your stars. All right. Okay. So we've talked about utilities file importing libraries from GitHub, and always remember to keep working on Java, because in the next session we're going to be dealing with saving images and loading images, connecting different screens, how to close an activity, opening a new activity, all those cool stuff. All right, so with that said, I will catch you in the next one.